SWAIN is like all over the place. Like, I got no clue. SWAIN doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up, all right? I don't. All right, guys, I know what you're thinking. I could have done this yesterday. I get it. I know they were leaked a little bit ahead of time. I personally don't like making content off of leaks. That's just my thing. I don't know, because God forbid it's wrong, and then now I released a video with completely wrong information. So, today, they actually fully released all the Noxus spoilers with a new champion. If you guys haven't already heard, which you probably did because of yesterday's leaks, it's SWAIN. So that's what we're going to be going over today. So as always, shit just works here. If you haven't already subscribed, hit that sub button. Got lots of Runeterra content coming down the pipe. And before we get into SWAIN, we're going to go over the slew of Noxus cards they actually spoiled alongside SWAIN, which were not spoiled or leaked yesterday. So there is some new stuff to go over, and that's what we're going to be hitting on first. Alright, so before we get into SWAIN, we got some of the cards that were not leaked yesterday. First one is actually Imperial Demolitionist. Wow, I almost could not say that. That's a lot to say. Imperial Demolitionist is a 2-cost, 2-attack, 3-health follower, and wow, this effect is insane. So I hope your guys' mind goes to the exact same place as mine does, which is one card in particular, Crimson Disciple. And wow, talk about the combo potential with this and Crimson Disciple. You're talking about a 2-drop that deals 4 damage straight to the enemy Nexus. That is insane. When you think of other aggro cards that were played, like Boom Crew Rookie in the, Noxus, Piltover, and Zaun versions of aggro and burn, this now is very much on par with a sort of aggro combo burn type, situation. So all I'm going to say is my mind, the gears, every video I make, they're turning. We're doing that Vladimir deck, and this combo deck is going to be a thing after this set drops. Next up, we have City Breaker, and I do like this card design. It's a 4-cost, 0-attack, 5-health minion, and at the start of every round, it's dealing 1 damage to the enemy Nexus. Now, overall, it's not a terrible card, but I don't know, I just don't think it's going to see too much play. Because it has 0 attack, depending on what other cards are released, I don't think this really has too much utility. It does have 5 health, so you can actually trigger a lot of those, deal damage to your own unit effects, but it doesn't have an additional effect that happens when it is damaged. So again, the utility seems pretty low. What I will say is, if the control version of this deck, which is more of the SWAIN route, SWAIN's kind of more of a control-y card. It kind of doesn't know what it really wants to be. We'll go over that again in a little bit. If you do go the control route, this card kind of puts a clock or a timer on your opponent, dealing 1 damage every turn. It's kind of like putting shrooms in their deck, right? When you have a certain amount of shrooms in your opponent's deck, now they're on a clock where they know they only have, 3, 4, 5 more turns until they're dead. So they will need to eventually get rid of this card, but it has almost no early game pressure. So if you play this on turn 4, you're losing a fair bit of tempo. And next up is the Leviathan, and again, this screams more of the SWAIN control archetype of dealing damage to the opponent's Nexus. It's 8 cost, 5 attack, 8 health, and immediately when you play it, you draw a SWAIN. So right there, even with no other effects, it's not a terrible card. I mean, you have pretty beefy stats with it having 8 health, and you're drawing a card, so it's not terrible. On top of that, at round start, every single round, you're dealing 1 damage, I almost said 3, but 1 damage 3 times to the enemy Nexus. Now, that does matter that it's 3 separate times for, different card effects instead of just 3 damage in 1 shot. So I'm curious to see what other cards come out that kind of use that wording to their advantage. But honestly, I do like this card design. I think it's an awesome, late game control finisher. It's going to be very difficult to remove off the field. And unless you have something like Ruination or Vengeance, in which case your opponent is now forced to play a card like that. Another thing that honestly just popped into my head is maybe some sort of like ramp Noxus control deck with Freljord possibly, right? Now that they essentially unnerfed or buffed again Wording Stone so that it now has 4 health, it's very possible you could play something like Wording Stones turn 3, City Breaker turn 4, and then now you're in a more of a ramp situation, right? And then you obviously have Catalyst of Aeons that you can play in that deck as well. So very curious to see if some sort of ramp deck comes out of that. It seems fun, and it seems like a very, very different play style than we've already seen, and there's already so many different deck archetypes out there. All right, so now we have 2 spells that were revealed, and there's 2, so I'm not really sure which one they're teasing as Swain's champion spell. I'm going to go with the 3-cost one, because I don't really think they'd want to release a 1-cost champion spell at this current state of the game. But we'll start with the 1-cost card. So the first one is Ravenous Flock, 1 cost, fast speed, deal 4 damage to a stunned or damaged enemy. Very good effect. Honestly, super good effect, and not overpowered at all, right? You figure, okay, 1 cost, 4 damage. But what this card does do is it gives more options for things like, you know, Yasuo, right? Swain's effect, as you'll see in a little bit, also has a stun on it. So this kind of links all of the different Noxian champions together to just give a little bit more playability to all of them. And probably, you know, we were talking about Yasuo in the last video on how they buffed him up to 4 health. Yasuo will likely be very, very playable with cards like this being released. All right, and here's the 3-cost spell that I think is his champion spell. Again, that is not confirmed, but we're going to take an educated guess here. Noxian Fervor, 3-cost, fast speed, deal 3 damage to one of your allied units to deal 3 damage to anything on the opponent's field or even their Nexus. So essentially what this is it's like a different way of playing Get Excited, right? So Get Excited's cost is discarding a card from your hand. This cost is dealing 3 damage to one of your own units. So it's, you're sacrificing the advantage, the card advantage with Get Excited. With this, you're sacrificing a little bit of tempo. And honestly, considering, again, all of the different combos that this can have with something like a Crimson Disciple, I think this will be a pretty good card as far as combo decks are concerned. Again, the Crimson Disciple starts at 3 health, so that doesn't really help much, but typically you're playing buffs like Brahms Takeheart or something like that in some of the older versions of those Crimson decks. So I'm very curious to see if this does make its way into those sort of combo decks like that. All right, and here we have it. We have another new champion in Swain. So we have a 5-cost, 3 attack, 6 health champion. So right there, you're on par with like Thresh, right? And Thresh is more of a control-y late game champion. Okay. Then we have Fearsome. So Fearsome, okay, now you're talking more aggro. You want to attack, right? And he has a Nexus Strike ability that when he strikes the Nexus, he deals 3 damage to the Nexus on top of that. So I don't really know what to make of that particular ability. It seems really odd and not useful, I guess. Like, you know, you think to yourself, oh, nice, 3 damage to the Nexus, but I don't know, with all of the other Noxus cards and all the different combo potentials with the Crimson cards, it just doesn't seem like it has that big of a place. Now, his level up 12 non-combat damage is definitely something that's doable, especially with these new cards that were released. So he can level up. He's definitely on the harder side to level up, but he does not need to see that damage. So he will level up inside the deck as well, which definitely helps. So once he does level up, again, he's getting the Thresh effect, the Thresh stat boosts, right? So he's got the 4 attack and the 7 health. But now, on top of that, he maintains the Fearsome, by the way. But when he deals damage to the enemy Nexus, he is stunning the strongest back row enemy. So now what I take back row to be is if you're in combat, it's going to be people that are not actually blocking, right? So this will have to be an effect that you use outside of combat, generally speaking. Otherwise, you're going to lose some of the tempo that you actually get by stunning that strongest enemy. And now when you Nexus Strike, you deal 3 to all enemies. So again, this just to me is it's just odd. I could see this being used as a defensive tool on your opponent's turn. If you are dealing damage to their Nexus, now you can, stun their strongest enemy, maybe live another turn. So again, I'm looking more towards that ramp, archetype with more of a control version of dealing damage to the enemy Nexus. So it'd be interesting to see what comes of that. But again, he's got so many different routes to take as Swain. I'm very curious to see what the #1 deck archetype is with him having so many different effects and so many different uses. And there you have it. That is Swain. I am counting down the days until we release I think we got 2 more regions to go that they'll spoil. And then finally, the last region, which is a new region, which I'm sure they're waiting until, the very last reveal for that, which will probably be just before the game officially launches. God, I can't wait for that. I got some champions I'm pulling for, so we'll see if they actually hit them. So until next time, everybody, stay healthy, stay positive. I hope shit just works for you, and peace out.